It's just, all right, we are live. It's Wednesday. We're back with our weekly episode of The Positive Effect. My name's April Sabral. I am the founder of Retail U, an online e-learning platform for retail managers, and an author of a book called The Positive Effect. And I am so excited today because every week I show up here to have this amazing conversation with retail leaders that have a positive effect on the teams, the businesses that they lead, and the industry at large. And so I am super excited today, Tim, to have you on The Positive Effect. So thank you so much for joining me.
Many thanks, April. I'm honored to be on The Positive Effect and share some insights and stories with you.
Great. And I was introduced to you through Ron Thurston. So thank you, Ron, for introducing us. He's always like a supporter of the show and, has been a guest on it many times. And he has this amazing book called Retail Pride. If any of you are watching this, you need to go grab it. But one thing I always say before we jump into your story is share this. If you find this in your feed, share it with your retail network. This is amazing conversations that happen every week. We go live, and they're conversations that are mentorship conversations. You're going to learn from some of the most amazing retailers that I have, leaders that I have the pleasure of meeting. So with that, we're going to jump right into, Tim, your story. So my first question to you is really, well, it's a two-part question. It's like, number one, how did you get into retail? Was it intentional? Was it accidental? Ron coined that, I think, in his book, The Accidental Retail Career. And then share that story. And then number two, walk us through your retail journey, your career, from where you started to where you've been and just along the way, what you've learned. I love hearing this from retail leaders and getting to share this with our audience because I think it's so inspiring to the retail leaders that are coming up today.
Answer to the first question, I just kind of fell into it. I was in high school and I was in my college years going to university. And I worked part-time in a variety of stores at Sims, at Ben Hill, and then ended up at Saks Fifth Avenue. And when I graduated college, I thought about it, and it was totally accidental. But once I gained some experience, I enjoyed it so much, both from the social and the business aspect, and I've never looked back. To tell you my story, and I'll try and do it briefly, there's a couple of days there, so stay with me.
Yeah.
And amazing journey in so many ways. I went through the executive training program at Saks. I was an assistant buyer, so I had a really good merchant workout in the years there. And then one of the colleagues that I had worked with at Saks, I managed the Southampton Saks. It was a seasonal store as part of that experience.
Okay.
And she was heading up the opening of Banana Republic in New York City. So I came on board as store manager, opened the store in the West Village. We had a team of about 40, 45 people. It was really my first full-blown 7-day-a-week operation. And then went on to open our store in Midtown, which was massive, the volume. And again, this was in Banana's heyday when they started as just a concept, out of Marin County. I then went on, was promoted as a district manager, moved to Chicago for a couple of years, doubled the amount of stores there. And I would add that it was really good to get out of New York and then start to learn about different parts of the country and the approach. And so that really just further deepened my enjoyment of my work.
Yeah.
And then shifted divisions. Our managing director from Banana moved to London. And this was just when Gap was expanding their brand in UK. There were 3 stores there, and he knocked on my door and said, would you consider moving to London because I need help in expanding what we did here. So I put half my things in storage, the other half I packed with me and, learned a little bit about Gap division, which was different. And lived in London for 2 years. When I got there were 3. When I left, there were 35 stores plus a kids division and stores in Oxford and Cambridge and Belfast. And it was probably one of the highlights of my career in terms of that. I then came back to the States. I was a regional manager with Pier 1, which gave me a taste for home furnishings. They had particular challenges in New York City, so I worked with them. And then went to someone, again, it's often who you know, had recruited me to Barneys, New York, when they were just getting on the map at Madison Avenue. Outstanding opportunity. I was the director of their men's store. Again, it was explosive in terms of what was going on in that business. I was there for a couple of years and then shifted because our GM, they had financial problems, and that was part of the DNA a little bit with Barneys along the way, if they were public or private or family. He had gone to Nike and recruited me as a GM for Nike Town, New York, which again was a massive launch on 57th Street, close to 400 people, 30 managers, a remote warehouse in New Jersey.
Wow.
Really outstanding. And I pushed the doors open with Phil Knight 3 months before we were scheduled to open, because somebody got in their head that it would be really great to open the Friday before the New York City Marathon. And I'm a marathon runner. I was passionate about this. So we got everyone together and we just made it happen. So it was a great experience. They're a powerhouse marketer as a brand. And then I took a turn and said, with the experience that I've had in Europe and the States and monobrand and multi-brand, I want to see what I can bring to the table as an individual. So I consulted and worked with the NBA. There was a referral there. I helped them open their flagship on Fifth Avenue. And this was opposite a big consulting firm that kind of want this guy around. They wanted to do this 60-page PowerPoints. And I was the guy with the feet on the ground. So I was in operations and key areas. And then what started as a 2-week project with National Geographic in Washington, a colleague, again, who I knew, said, I need some help. They have a retail store in their campus in Washington, as well as some airport locations. And it's a little messy. The manager just wanted to buy a lot of plush toys. So what started as just, helping clean house turned into a 4-year assignment. Part of it was consulting, and then they hired me as their director of online and retail. And it was an amazing experience to take what you know and bring that to a nonprofit, organization. And NG, I had writers and photographers and cartographers. Again, a highlight. I was part of the shuttle culture because I worked out of New York and was commuting to Washington. After 9/11, it was a big trudge, back and forth. It was harder and harder. And then I was recruited back to Barneys. I was on very good terms with them when I left and became their director of the women's store, back to the men's store, and then eventually promoted to vice president of their off-price division, which included 15 outlets around the country, as well as 2 annual warehouse sales in New York and LA, which were huge multi-million-dollar events.
Yeah.
And again, it was really great to get out and learn more about the country and different markets and what the difference between Waikele and Sawgrass Mills is in Florida. And some people would be along the way like, why are you going into the off-price business? Why that? Why wouldn't you want to learn that and add that to your experience? And it was a great experience at that. Then Barneys hit I was there for a good period of time.
Yeah, you were there for 14 years. I saw that on your LinkedIn profile. I was like, what? 14 years? That's a long stint in retail. Wow.
Yeah. Then they ran into their difficulties, dissolved the position, and I went on to work through a colleague that I had worked very well with at Celine, and I became their VP for North America. So I had 25 stores again. A great contrast. It got me back onto the high street with luxury in the women's business like nobody's. And LVMH is quite a powerhouse. So that involved periodic trips to Paris to really understand the brand and where they wanted to go directionally. So again, a great, just a really wonderful experience. They changed the designer. Phoebe Philo left. Hedi Slimani came in. The chairman left. So there was a big changeover. And again, we broke up. They eliminated the position, and it changed. So I took a breath and did a lot of independent work with a growing phone company, Alive, in Bahamas. They had a series of stores there and needed some expertise, and did a number of things, but also missed working with the team. So my last stop was at Nordstrom. They were coming to New York City, and they made a huge investment here because as a $15 billion company, a third of their volume is online, and New York's their biggest online market. So it was a really great refresh, certainly on the customer-centric. The family is still there and very involved in the business, as well as really logistics and fulfillment. And really, how do you have physical stores and online and make it seamless for the customer? That was one of my biggest takeaways. And currently, and then COVID came and they didn't
changed our world.
So we broke up amicably, of course. And now I'm actually working as an advisor with 3 groups. I'm doing some talking, I'm writing, I'm exploring the landscape a little bit with some potential houses, because I do miss being part of a team.
Right.
So,
God, what a dynamic career. Like, listening to all of that, I'm like, how come I didn't know you before? Like, seriously.
I hope that captured it. I don't want to take too much, but
that's amazing. Because
I have a website under my name, and I'm on Instagram too. So
okay, so like what I'm hearing from what you just shared is like you were open to move, like you moved states, you moved countries, which I think is important for people to hear. And you were open to having different experiences in different brands to grow your skill set. Like you started off from buying, which I wish I had some more experience in that. So, but then you also did high street, you also did furniture, you also did off price, you did luxury. And I think that's really key for people to listen and hear that you can have an amazing career and touch different points, because sometimes people get stuck in a lane or feel like, oh, I've only done luxury, so I don't want to do off price. What's that going to do for my career and my resume? But when I listen to what you're sharing, you've done so many different pieces of it that's what's probably made you a really rounded leader and now able to help people with your advice, right?
April, 100%. I would say that it was a composition, and I won't repeat what you say. I often equate retail with theater. You have these different stage sets, and I think when you increase or change the size and scale and variety of those stage sets, along the way you learn really, if you're good at what you do, you learn how to adapt. And then with the scripts, whether it's a mono brand or a multi-brand, across these categories, it can be really very powerful. And I would just add that this stage set isn't only just on the shop floor, which is where I think it starts, because that's where our customers are, but also in the distribution center, in a stock room, in a corporate environment. Like, understanding those stage sets too are really important, because then it helps you collaborate better, both internally and externally with your customers. So it's really served me.
That's such golden advice that you just dropped, those nuggets. Like, seriously, if you're a leader and you're in retail and you're thinking about, think about the different stages that Tim just said and how they all work together. I'm a big believer in that. I think, and it does start on the shop floor with the customers and the interaction, right? And you've had so many different amazing experiences. It's so funny, because I was in Gap when they were probably at around 35 stores. So we probably just crossed as ships in the night, but I was in the Marble Arch location. I just remember being part of that brand at that time, and also Banana Republic, just being part of an established brand, but growing it. It was a really great experience. You learn so much. So let's shift gears into less leadership lessons learned, because I think that these, getting somebody like you that's had this amazing experiences, there's probably some really amazing pivotal moments that have happened in your career and lessons learned. And I want to be able you to share them with people that find this conversation so that they can learn from them. So what are some pivotal moments in your career?
A few come to mind, and I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to kind of think through them before our conversation today. A few come to mind. And it starts with listening and being really aware, 360 aware of the environment that you're in. I'll jump to London, since we were talking about that most recently. I had a store manager, Elaine. She managed Regent Street. We were just getting going. I was there for a few weeks. Mickey Drexler, who was one of my 10 retail icons, came often to see how things were going and how the brand was evolving in Britain. And we were in Regent Street, and he always, and there's a theme coming about being on your shop floor, he would always head to the shop floor and had a philosophy of, there's 2 types of people that work for this organization: those that service the customer, and then those that support those that do. And that was the backdrop that kept everything really straight and flattened it out in keeping it real. So Elaine, she knew who he was, but she was very straightforward. She had a big role and a big team. And she basically said, and I will not imitate her accent, but she said it with such passion and conviction. She essentially said, look, you're going to send your buyers to Europe to find fashion and travel in advance, and then send it to me 6 to 9 months later and think we're going to be in a leadership position in London. That's when there were longer lead times for clothing.
Right.
And she said, that's not going to work. And, he breathed and he took note. And within 3 to 4 months, there was a planning and merchant team dedicated to UK merchandising.
Oh, I love it.
To focus on what pieces of the assortment need to be and the other ones that need to be sent to other markets that may not have been as advanced in some of their fashion.
Right.
So that's one.
Yeah.
A pivotal moment, but on both saying what needs to be said and humility from a CEO.
Love it.
Another one that comes is Fred Pressman. He was Barney's son. I worked with him when he was in his 60s and 70s. When I was managing the men's store, he was on my floor every day by noon, 1 o'clock. And he would simply look at the stage set and walk and just listen to how an associate was interacting with the customer and how they were selling, how they handled the merchandise, the choreography, what was being exchanged, the questions, to really evaluate their selling skills and other intelligence he needed to gain. Long story short, after the sale was consummated or the customer left, he would go over to the associate, provide praise, provide suggestion. I mean, if you were piling stuff on a counter, he would go be livid, for example.
All right.
If there were problems, he would find me and say, fix this. But if there were merchandising issues, which is why I love the merchant piece of this too, because it's okay to be a generalist cross-category,
right,
to understand how it comes together. He'd go to the phone when they were still attached to the wall and get merchants from downtown on the shop floor in 15 minutes and say, why are we running out of a 1523 white basic dress shirt? Like, that never happens. To give them a wake-up call.
Right.
Third story, and I'm being swift because
I love that though, because I always say that the urgency has to be to get into the store and listen to the customer, and so what I'm hearing is listening to the customer, but people had the courage to actually step up and say it and do something about it, which I love. So I'm loving this.
As a sidebar, I would say too that the larger the company, the more floors in corporate, the bigger it gets, the harder it is to go straight to the front line and hear from your customer. You don't need it sometimes deciphered and prioritized through the ranks. Sometimes you need to go hear it in the tone that it's being shared. Very, very important.
Love that.
Third store, when I was at Barneys, so I'm new in the off-price division. I just come from Madison and I start to get into my stores, get on the floor in Leesburg, Virginia, at a very nice Simon outlet center outside of Washington. Yeah. And I go to the store and it just looked kind of crappy. I'm sorry. The merchandising was bad. The visuals were not appealing. And you didn't know where men's was and women's was and what was going on. So I talked to the store manager and I said, how do you feel this looks? Does this really work? Why is this rack here and whatever? And he very matter-of-factly and somewhat remotely said, well, we're just an outlet. That helped set my compass on what I was doing with this division across the board to say, no, this is not just an outlet, this is Barneys. No matter what the product is, there's a standard. And so we got into clienteling, we cleaned up the stores, I worked with visual, we really honed in on the mixes. And so that taught me a lot. Sometimes you're going to learn from your folks of what.
I love that. I love that, because that's like, hold on a second, press the pause button here. We're not just an outlet. And then how that shaped the way that you could actually go in and shape strategy and like make a difference. I love that.
Last one I'll share is most recently at Nordstrom. We had been on board for a few months. There was a leadership meeting. Bruce Nordstrom came into town. He's in his early 80s. Very nice. And the family's very involved and approachable in the business. And he had given us a short talk about the company. And at the end, there was Q&A. So I raised my hand and I said, what advice would you give to someone who's new to the family? And I guess I expected some extended, deep answer. And it was deep, but it was very brief. And he said, Tim, simply get the team to smile. And that's in my 10 commandments, because when you smile, now that we can take these masks off safely, of course,
Yeah.
You smile, it sets the stage for a relationship and says you're approachable and says you're friendly and invites conversation. And whether you're on the sidewalk or you're in a store, that makes a really big difference. And I found that really, really a smart thing, because sometimes you go into stores and restaurants and airlines, and if people have like a frown on, or they don't look approachable, you really don't want to connect.
Yeah. That is so simple, but it's such a cat. And he shared that with you. You must have been like, wow, that's common sense, but it's such a powerful one line. I mean,
I take it with me. I really do.
Right. Like, I think I shared a blog post a while back on Retail U about like the science of smiling and what it actually does to people when you smile. Because people are like, you're always smiling. I'm like, yeah, because you know what it does to everybody around me when I smile. But sometimes when people are in stores, I can see them. They're like focused. They're looking at a visual move and like so serious. And it's like, no, we have to smile more. I love that. Wow. Like what golden.
Now, especially because we've had these masks on our faces, and
right.
obviously need to continue in the right places. But you know, that's a huge expression. Is what you're doing with your mouth.
Yeah. So if you're watching and listening to this day, you just heard it from Tim, like really literally what the family from Nordstrom said to him. It was like, just have a smile. I'm gonna keep that in mind as I go about my day today. And actually, when I was thinking this morning in the elevator, there was a guy that was working in the hotel that I'm staying in, and he was just so serious. And I was like, if you could just lift somebody up, that's what we do all day in retail, right? With people and teams. Okay. So another question I wanted to ask you. I love asking this question. So what has been one of your biggest hurdles or obstacles to overcome on your, leadership journey? And then how did you?
There are many along the way, and there are obstacles depending where you're at with your own evolution professionally. Right. I'll give you a few really quickly. How I dealt with it had some complexity and is not such a short story, so I want to respect our time.
Yeah.
One of them, and I thought about this, is this top-down leadership approach. Really down on that. I think it may work in the military in certain areas where there needs to be compliance that will save lives and keep everything together. But I generally think in retail environments, and maybe some others, that top-down approach, which I've experienced along the way, from some, actually, you know what? You're going to get short-term results.
Yeah.
You're not going to get a long-term commitment.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just kind of have to suck it up and move on and digest some of it. And that's what I have done on some occasions. And once in a while, you have to sit tall and say no, and take a little bit of a chance. And I'm not saying being subversive, but just challenge this I know all thing. And sometimes it's an issue for big companies and for international companies.
I know, because titles go before people. I say that all the time. It's like, you got to really think about this and not make your title go before you, and find ways to lower people's guard so that you can get them to share. But also, when you're in a role reporting into somebody with a title, understand that they may not think of themselves as that title, and have the courage, like some of the stories you just shared about people, to share what's really necessary. Yes. I've had those experiences too. And I really say to leaders all the time when I coach them, this is just a title. This is not who I am. It's just my responsibility in the organization, because I have to have one.
Yes.
But really, let's talk about what we do. And I think that's really good advice, particularly today in the world that we live in retail, because we're working with multi-generations that, want to be heard.
Multi-experience levels. The other two that come to mind, and again, I want to respect our time, there's having the wrong, insufficient product, merchandise, or services for your customer. I think often that gets dictated, and there's a model, and this is going to be the opening assortment, and you have a season or two to figure it out. But sometimes if you're a global brand and you need to remember to be locally specific, and that carries with it all sorts of dialogue and store visits and follow-ups. The other one is that I would say that's been a challenge that you have to resculpt, particularly because we're in the people business, guiding, developing teams, is making sure there are the resources for your team's training and development and success. To me, what drives me, nothing makes me happier than seeing people grow, giving them the tools, certainly expecting them to carry out their job, but to see them grow and achieve and grow. That is truly what feeds me. And I think sometimes you need those tools.
Yeah, you do. And like I'm really well known for, when I do store visits, asking the manager, you know, what's their opportunity to grow in, and then asking the district supervisor or the regional director, whoever's managing that person, and they should be saying the same thing. And if they're not saying the same thing, that's my, there's no development plan in place. There's just conversations happening, but then the tools aren't there to actually support this person. That's why I built Retail U, because everywhere I went, I was like, okay, I keep using this FYI book, which I love, Low Manager Competence. It's like my go-to, but I need to break this down more simply for field leaders, because one of the things that was amiss was just not having those development plans, because I'd rather spend an hour talking to that team about that and get that going and get it right, because that's going to affect, I really believe, that their leadership ability and competency is going to affect the results versus just doing a visual checklist and doing the same thing over and over again.
Yes.
And I had those conversations with my teams all the time and would teach them how to create great development plans, but then use tools and then provide them. I was having a conversation with a leader the other day, and she was like, I was Googling for a TED talk this weekend on how to have a difficult conversation because I just don't know how to do it. And I was like, you know, like, this is the thing that everybody gets stuck with, is like how to have the conversation.
Yes,
you know?
Completely.
All right, we're coming up on time. These conversations go so quick. We've got, you know, I'm going to ask you a few more questions. It's 25 minutes. We've got about 5-10 minutes left, and then we'll have to start wrapping up. But if you think about, you just shared a little bit about, and I want to make sure I get your top 3 tips before we wrap up. But like, if you think about leadership development, then do you think that leadership is natural, like it's in you, or do you think it can be developed? Because this is an interesting conversation, right?
Yes, I'm not sure it's either or.
Okay.
That would be my short answer. And just maybe a line or two on that is, I think it really depends on the individuals and who they are, what the influences were in their life, and the elements they learned along the way. So I think, yes, in some respects it can be taught and inspired. Mm-hmm. And in other cases, there are people that just have a presence and can walk right into it and have it. You know, I'll cite my own story growing up. My father was a captain. He was an airline pilot for 30 years. And so he used to come back and tell leadership stories when I was a kid of, you know, you're managing a team of people. There's before the flight, during the flight, after the flight. And you're leading a group with your customers, passengers, at 35,000 feet. And there are all sorts of things that happen. So he used to come back with a lot of stories that it helped me really understand some of the components of leadership, that later in life on the way, like, oh, I know this one, you know, whatever. So
that's amazing. I love that. Wow. And to have those conversations, right, from your parent early on to kind of shape and inspire you to learn about that and think about that. And I always say, you know, leadership to me is not a title. Leadership is how you show up every day. If you want to create a culture, you don't have to be a manager to be a leader. You could just be a leader in your community and show up and make an impact and make a difference and inspire people. So I love that answer.
One of the other things I would just add to that is that I learned along the way is that one of the folks I worked with had a philosophy that was like, you know what, you model the behavior you expect in others, certainly, but you also respect that everyone's role is equally important. Everyone. CEO, part-time salesperson, whatever, we all have our respective roles in the theater that are important in the roles we play. And that stuck with me too, because I think that matters. Huge.
And, you know, when I work with young leaders that are just starting to get promoted, and I made that mistake early on in my career where I was like, I was the manager and I had to do it all. And then I realized, oh, my team don't feel like I trust them. I'm not developing them. And like I was taking my title too seriously, you know, maybe. I learned, like, the more I grew and, you know, took on more responsibility, the less it was about me directing. I mean, you gave direction, but it was more about me facilitating and developing others and helping them. So I think if you're a young manager, and a lot of our audience at Retail U is, you know, it can be from CEO that get all of this advice from leaders like yourself, or it can be like a young manager or a regional that wants to grow in their career and is inspired by hearing people's story like you. I think about what Tim's shared today, because this is really important information. Don't, people work for people, no matter what the brand is. You create that by the way that you interact with people every day. I always say to everybody, you have a negative, a neutral, or a positive effect on people every day, right? Which one do you want to have? Right? So what are your top 3 tips? Like if you were going to talk to, retail leaders, if you're on this stage and like, we're asking you all this, amazing conversation, but like, what 3 tips would you give to retail leaders to be successful today in the new era of retail? It is evolving and changing. And that's one thing I love about this business so much. But what would you advise them?
I would say first and foremost with retail, if you're thinking about a career in it, go for it. It is such an exciting time in terms of the evolving ideas and tools and the global marketplace. Social connection. So retail is an amazing field. The first thing I would say is retail is not going away. And there are 4 precepts that rest within that of retail not going away, that it's about the culture, your teams, the product or service that you sell, and the customer experience. That has gone on since the beginning of time.
That's never changed, right?
Those 4 things have not changed. With technology, and obviously we're in a pandemic time, that still matters. So just how do you adapt and grow within that construct?
Yeah.
One thing I would say, and I'm a mentor to students and prior co-workers. I've done some teaching at university. I think sometimes teachers are great leaders because there's a lot of giving in that way. Is I often say to just be flexible and going back to listening and be flexible so you can learn. I have a lot of young students that often are saying, well, I want to work for as a fashion director here, but there is an interesting opportunity in hospitality in a luxury 4 Seasons. Like, be flexible. In your 20s, there's no mistake you're going to make because that's your learning time. So I think the second thing is be flexible, particularly now. Yeah. And lastly, regardless of the industry, in this current chapter that we're all living through, maintain a level of gratitude, stay positive, and really focused, and you're gonna arrive and just move the journey well, and you won't look back. So I think part of it is being grateful and positive.
I love that.
Related.
I love that. I absolutely love that you brought gratitude into it, because I think gratitude is such a great energy that we can all practice more of every day, because we're driving results and trying to achieve this, but like taking a pause and just being grateful for where we are and what we're doing and sharing that with others and creating that will inspire an amazing culture for customers and employees to experience.
And it's been underlined now more than ever when we've had to stop in our rooms and think about what's important.
Yeah, 100%. So is there anything that you didn't get to share today that you wish you had shared? Because like, I always like to ask that. That's one of my questions I always ask at the end of interviews. Is there anything that, you want to share that you didn't get to that came up as you were going through this?
I've thought about it along the way, because in all these, often when I would go to stores and I'd have overnights or I'd be moving in different places, and I'm an avid traveler being an airline kid. Yeah. I would always run in my running. And one of the things you learn from running marathons is that it's going to be difficult, and there can be joy in the struggle in how you evolve and what you're going to do. At mile 2, you're running off adrenaline. When you're on the Queensboro Bridge, you're past the halfway point, but you still got Bronx to get to and then get back into Manhattan. So all I'm saying is that embrace the journey. There's going to be challenges along the way. We're all going to face them now. There's no shortcuts. So embrace the journey. That's part of what helps shape where you go and what the outcome is.
Oh, I love that. Embrace the journey. Sometimes it's just, we're just so busy in our heads and we've got so many things to do, especially in retail, because there's always things coming at you. Yes. But just sitting down and being present and enjoying that moment and embracing the journey and knowing that every step of the journey, you're going to discover something new about yourself, about your team, about your customer, and just continue to grow. I absolutely love that. So this was an amazing conversation, Tim. Thank you so much for being on the show.
It was a pleasure. I enjoyed sharing, April, and with everyone on Positive.
So we're going to start wrapping up. If you find this in your feed, I'm going to say, go ahead and share it, make a comment on something that stood out to you. Me and Tim are going to go back and read the comments afterwards, and we'll, make any comments on it. But if you were inspired or any takeaways, I love reading them. These are amazing conversations. And then, it will be uploaded on Apple Podcasts as well and Spotify. So you'll be able to listen to it when you're transporting yourself in your car or whatever, but get some inspiration from Tim and his lessons learned in his retail career. And that wraps up another episode of The Positive Effect. So thank you so much, Tim, again, for joining us. Can't thank you enough. And we'll see everybody next week. Bye for now.
Take care.